Welcome, everyone. How resilient is the lira? Welcome to this session about the lira issue. Well, the most sensitive of among all sessions, of course. Welcome to our distinguished guest speakers, Mr. Marwan Skandar, Mr. Marwan Barakat. لا عارف ثلاثتهم بالدور Marwan Barakat and Mr. Munir Rashid, that I will present later on. Well, to introduce the session, I would like to ask you first a simple question. How many times per an average week do people ask you, will the lira collapse? Or for the most pessimistic, when will the lira collapse? That's not if, but when. This question would come from your colleagues, your acquaintances, your family, even the grocery guy around the corner who has gathered $20,000 or $30,000 and he wants to make profit from the deposits in lira in bank, but he is afraid to do so. This question, I'm guessing that your answer would be, just a guess, would be the collapse of the lira won't happen anytime soon or for the foreseeable future. But that's not the end of the story. Here comes the trap of the what-if scenarios. You cannot escape these questions. What if there is an Israeli war, or a political deadlock, or a change in the policy of the central bank, or a growing deficit with no money coming from the Sadr conference? Another interrogation mark is how far does the foreseeable future go? 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, because you know that the most rewarding interest rates are for the longer period. The what if is toxic material, an attempt to predict the future. Well, in fact, we did not invite Layla Abdul Latif to the show. But our guests here are well armed and informed to answer most of these questions. And to tell you the truth, when they can't, this means nobody can. We'll start the presentation from Dr. Marwan Barakat, and we thank him for preparing this presentation, especially for our conference. Mr. Barakat is the Group Chief Economist and Head of Research Department at Bank Audi, which means the #1 analyst in the #1 bank. So he is well informed. Now, there is a lot of knowledgeable people and economists in the country. But Mr. Barakat is one of the few who is unbiased. No political agenda and no personal interest. Mr. Barakat, it's for you for, let's say, 20 minutes to leave some time to the questions of the audience afterwards. Please,
panel in particular related to the outlook of the national currency. Given the number of questions that are being addressed today by the Lebanese as to the short-term, medium-term, and long-term outlook of the Lebanese currency stability. Winston Churchill used to say that if you want to destroy a country, destroy its currency, to highlight the importance of monetary stability and the overall stability of a country. There are 3 facets of sovereignty, we say: the army, the land, and the currency. So the stability of the currency is important not only from a social standpoint or an economic standpoint, but also from a national standpoint and from a sovereignty standpoint. Having said that, the presentation, few slides that I'm going to present, highlights both strengths and weaknesses, so that we can extract after that the lessons from the presentation to highlight the opportunities and threats looking forward related to investment in the national currency. First of all, what are the functions of a currency? you have four functions: medium of transaction, unit of account, store of value, and standard of deferred payment, or a currency for borrowing. During the Civil War years, the Lebanese currency lost its four functions. It lost its role as a medium of transaction because you needed bags of currency to buy a suit or a dress. It lost its role as a unit of account because disclosure in Lebanese pounds lost its credibility. It lost its role as a store of value because we reached a certain point in time where the dollarization of deposits reached 92%. It lost its role as a currency for borrowing because the dollarization of loans reached 85% at the end of the Civil War. Having said that, during the post-war era, the Lebanese pound regained most or partially some of its roles. It regained its role as a medium of transaction. It's being used for transaction. It regained its role as a unit of account after the stability. It partially regained its role as a store of value because dollarization of deposits decreased from 92% to 69% today, still high, but it decreased over the post-war years. And it partially restored its role as a currency for borrowing because today 67% of borrowing is in foreign currencies and the remaining is in Lebanese pounds when compared to a dollarization of 85% at the end of the Civil War. What helped restoring these roles was definitely the stability of the exchange rate over the past 20 years. It has been hovering within a 1501, 1514 bracket. When the central bank is under pressure to sell foreign currencies, it's at the 1514 rate. When it is under pressure, when the market is favorable and it's buying foreign currencies, it is at the 1501 rate. Over the past couple of years, it has been hovering close to the 1514, which means that the central bank is selling out of its foreign currency reserves to intervene on the foreign exchange market. Inflation is contained. We don't have high inflation in the country by emerging market standards, by global standards. Inflation on average has been 5% over the past 20 years. It increased to 6.5% this year in particular because of the increase in oil prices and its impact on transport costs, and because of the increase in schooling fees related to the public sector wage scale, and the taxes also had an impact that were related to the public sector wage scale as well. What we have witnessed recently is an increase in interest rates on deposits, which is important to maintain currency stability. But we have to bear in mind that this increase in the interest rate on deposit was coupled with a global increase in interest rates worldwide. The Federal Reserve has increased the federal fund rate. The LIBOR has been increased from close to 25 bips 2 years or 3 years ago to 2.50% today. The average today of the interest rate on the Lebanese pound deposit is 7.74%. Those are the figures as at end October. That's true that we have higher rates of interest for some maturities, 1 year, 5 year, but on average, the average cost of the banking system in terms of interest rates on LP is 7.74%. For the foreign currencies, for the US dollar, it's 4.63%. The ability of the central bank to maintain currency stability is highlighted by the willingness first, and the central bank governor always assures about the willingness of the monetary policy to maintain currency stability. And the second is the means, how much the central bank is able to maintain currency stability. And here we look at the foreign currency reserves. The reserves of the central bank today amount to $41 billion, without including gold reserves that are at $11 billion. With gold reserves, we are talking about $53 billion of foreign assets at the central bank, which is equivalent to the Lebanese pound money supply. We have full coverage of the Lebanese pound money supply by foreign assets available at the central bank. You might say in periods of pressure, it will be difficult to liquidate the gold reserves. So here, we stick to the foreign currency reserves available, and these are the $41 billion that cover 78% of the Lebanese pound money supply. In other words, if 78% of the Lebanese panic for a reason or the other and want to convert their Lebanese pounds into foreign currencies, the central bank has enough ammunition at hand to maintain the currency peg. Bearing in mind that in previous crisis episodes, back in 2005 upon the assassination of Prime Minister Rafi Hariri, and 2006 during the Israeli invasion, the maximum conversions out of the Lebanese pound to US dollar amounted to 30% of the Lebanese pound money supply. Today we are covered up to 78% of the Lebanese pound money supply, which is almost 2 times the average reserve adequacy ratio of similarly rated countries. The countries that have similar rating than Lebanon have an average reserve adequacy ratio of 42.7%. Lebanon has 78.7% in terms of reserve adequacy. In terms of coverage of months of import, this is an important measure. We're talking about 26 months of imports when compared to a global average of 12 months of imports. The stability of the currency in the long term is also supported by fundamentals, by macro fundamentals and monetary fundamentals. I'm talking about the growth of the money supply being more important than domestic money creation, which means that the net foreign assets of the system in the long term, over the past 25 years, have witnessed a positive growth. That's true that over the past few years, we had shortages, but in the long term, over 25 years, we have witnessed a positive growth in the net foreign assets of the system. Stability has been with a cost. First, the cost of sterilization cost, the accounts of the state at the central bank and at commercial banks. And we have the crowding out effect, which is the absorption of the foreign currencies from the central bank that could be otherwise used, you would say, for lending purposes to the private sector. The balance of payments is a negative factor, at least recently. Over the past few years, we have witnessed deficits in the balance of payments, specifically since 2011, with the exception of 2016, which was the year of the financial engineering operation of the central bank, the big operation of the central bank. But the $11 billion of cumulative deficits in the balance of payments that we have witnessed since 2011 till today compared to surpluses in the previous decade of $25 billion. So it looks like we are digging into the accomplishments of the previous decade year after year, but we did not use up all those surpluses of the balance of payments that have been reported over the period. Fiscal deficit is back on the rise. It increased from $9 billion over the first half of last year, $900 million, to $3 billion over the first half of this year, due to the fact that the public sector wage scale has costed more than it was supposed to, and due to the fact that public revenues have been on a decline because of the economic sluggishness, the overall economic sluggishness, which is weighing on economic growth in the country. Public indebtedness, public debt to GDP ratio has been on the rise over the past few years. It reached a low of 131% in 2012. It increased to 149% today, but it is still lower than the peak that we have witnessed 10 years ago. In 2006, the peak of the debt to GDP ratio was 185%. So we're still lower than the previous peak level of debt to GDP. The most important is that public sector debt is domestic in Lebanon. It's not held by foreigners, and the domestic investors tend to be more patient, renewing their subscriptions at the maturity dates, which gives a stability for the debt profile. If we look at market debt, and if we remove from public debt the creditor accounts, and we remove from the public debt the portfolios of the public sector institutions within the public debt and the governments, we reach the public debt to GDP ratio decreases from 149.5% to 57%, which is relatively more contained, I would say. Also, the public debt, that's true that we have the third highest public debt ratio worldwide, but also the assets of the banking system relative to GDP are also one of the highest around the world, which are at 30% today. What supports the banking system is the long-term growth in deposits. Here we're talking about over the past 14 years on the chart, whereby the CAGR in deposits have been 9% per annum. That's true that it slowed down recently, but it's still enough to meet the needs of the economy in both its private and public sector components. Of course, we need to do reforms in Lebanon. Of course, we cannot continue with high debt to GDP ratios and high deficit to GDP ratios. Our most important recommendation for reforms is to tackle the fiscal evasion gap, tax evasion, that we estimate at $4.9 billion, equivalent to 10% of GDP. Per year, yes, per year. Lebanon has committed to reduce its budget deficit to GDP ratio by 5% over a 5-year period, 1% per annum. If we bridge a quarter of this gap, 2.5% of GDP during this remaining presidential era, the remaining period of the presidential era, this is half of the effort required at the fiscal level. This is where the real effort has to come from, more than increasing taxes or what have you. Our fiscal scenario suggests that if we do reforms, spending rationalization, improvement in resource mobilization, fighting tax evasion, SADR as well. If we do reforms, our debt to GDP ratio would be able to decrease to 133% by the year 2022. But if we don't do reforms, our public debt to GDP ratio would reach 181% in the worst case scenario. So we would reach by 2022 the previous peak that we had reached in 2005. If I want to summarize in terms of upside and downside risks, I would say that first, the foreign currency reserves are offset by banks' foreign currency deposits at BDL. The balance of payments and the fiscal deficit are weighing on the fundamental exchange rate stability. But at the level of the upside, we have been able to maintain currency stability under difficult conditions, under domestic shocks and external shocks. And today we are supported by a high level of reserve adequacy, which, as we said, is equal to 2 times the average reserve adequacy that is reported in similarly rated countries. Debt sustainability, that's true, we have a high debt ratio, the third highest worldwide, high fiscal deficit, which is among the top decile worldwide, but the debt ratio gap with the rest of the world has improved over the past 10 years. We have decreased our debt to GDP ratio over the past 10 years, while the world has reported an increase in the debt to GDP ratio in the post-global financial crisis era, when all advanced countries have seen their increase in the debt to GDP, whereby the average of advanced countries is today at 110%. It used to be 75% back in 2006. There are exits that still exist at the level of reinforcement of resource mobilization and spending restraint. And in the long term, oil and gas could provide an exit for the required fiscal soft landing of the Lebanese economy. SADR alone is not enough. It has to be coupled with structural reforms, with significant reforms, in order to decrease our high debt and deficit ratios. Finally, if I were to end regarding the outlook of the economy, I would say, okay, the growth drivers today are weak in terms of the main growth drivers, tourism, real estate, construction, and what have you. And the high real interest rates are generating crowding out effects. Also, the delay in cabinet formation is affecting the real economy in different realms. First, it affects private investment because of the political uncertainties. It affects public investment because of the delay in SADR. It affects the reforms, the much needed reforms, and it affects financial inflows that we need much in order to finance our external deficits. If I were to end on a positive note, I would say, looking forward, CIP would provide a support, CIP and CEDR would provide a support to the growth and employment prospects in the foreseeable future. In the medium term, Syria's reconstruction would provide important opportunities for Lebanese enterprises that are well placed to contribute in the reconstruction, and it would reverse the adverse spillover effects that we had because of the Syrian crisis over the past few years, and that reflected on investment, on tourism, on foreign trade, on our exports. So a reversal of those adverse spillover effects would benefit the Lebanese economy. And finally, in the longer term, I would say the oil and gas extraction would have positive effects on fiscal soft landing, which is the most important factor weighing on exchange rate sustainability. If those 865 million oil barrels and 96 trillion cubic feet of gas that were estimated by the Ministry of Power were to be realized, if we really find such an oil and gas wells in our offshore, this means that this is going to impact our debt and deficit ratios, both on the numerator and denominator effect. Numerator because of the revenues generated from the oil and gas, the public revenues generated, and the denominator because the GDP would be higher by at least 30% according to our estimates when compared to the steady state level of GDP, because of the fact that oil and gas extraction would have positive effects on a number of sectors in the economy and on employment opportunities in Lebanon. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Barakat. All the sessions will be available on YouTube, and if you want to, on the website also, and if you want to review to all the sessions which are recorded by the the cameraman there, so you can review all the data that has been done, supplied by Dr. Barakat. So, thank you, Dr. Barakat. Mostly good news, some bad news, but nearly no ugly news. That's what overall. Well, now we are eager to hear the comments of Dr. Marwan Iskandar. I think there is no need to present furthermore this prominent economist, dozens of books, reports, articles, consultancies to high officials. Perhaps one narrative summarizes all this. When the McKinsey firm was tasked with preparing a report on Lebanon's economic options in early 2018, the reaction of a lot of people was, why McKinsey? Why not a local team headed by Marwan Iskandar? Who would know this issue better than him? So, Mr. Iskandar, it's your time. We are interested, of course, in your comments on what Mr. Barakat has said, but there is a policy of the central bank. The central bank has been instrumental during the last 10 years at least. And there are a lot of controversies. This good interventions, bad interventions, some critics, some saying that Mr. Riyad Salemi has done too far, has made too far for the sake of the local banks or for the sake of the economy. Well, your opinion counts, please.
First of all, I have to say that I'm pleasantly surprised with the number of people who are interested in the subject we are talking about. Secondly, and this is quite important in my view, people ask us, when is the country going to be bankrupt? There is no notion that a country can be bankrupt. The term that people can consider as an indication of bankruptcy is the fall in the exchange rate of the pound. We have witnessed this between 84 and 1992 when our currency went down from 4 pounds to the dollar to 2,850. And the country was at war. The Lebanese were at war with each other, with the Palestinians, and the country was not bankrupt. So let's forget about the notion that the country will be bankrupt. Now, about saying that Riyad Salami has gone too far, I would say that had not Riyad Salami taken the leadership as of 1993 and we left it in the hands of Sheikh Michel Khoury, we would certainly not be here. We would certainly not have the chance to work in Lebanon. Now, this is... At the same time, I have to make some observations that are not usually very welcome by other economists. I'm not a very traditional one. I don't think we have reserves of so many millions that belong to people who have deposited their money with the banks. Because if these people feel at one time or the other that their deposits are threatened and they want to transfer them outside, nothing will stop them from doing this. Now, we have a report, which is quite a good report from Goldman Sachs, who gave it tomorrow or the day before, where they say that if the foreign exchange deposits or if the deposits with the banks don't increase beyond the 3% or 3.5%, then in 2021 we are going to have a severe crisis. And I contend that we do not have an increase in deposits of 3.5 because the rate of the deposits for savings today could be for dollars well over 7%, and for Lebanese pounds, if it is more than a year, it could be well over 11. Now, if we record at the end of the year an increase of 3, it is really a reduction of about 5%, effectively, because people don't withdraw all their interest, but they withdraw part of their interest for their current expenses. So, in essence, I feel we can possibly go through in the coming year or so, but not for too long. Beyond that, if the increase is only 3%. This increase is not an increase. Let's not fool ourselves by interpreting figures in a way which they do not really represent. Then I believe at the same time that irrespective of the bad conditions we are suffering from, the true problem is with the fiscal aspect of our economy, meaning the budget and the expenditure of the budget, and now the higher rates on the public debt. You know, when Marwan said that interest rates have gone up in other countries, well, they have gone up by 0.5% or by 1%, not by 5 or 10. So we cannot compare the increase in interest rates here as if it is an ordinary matter. In the United States, they have increased the discount rate by 0.5%. In England, where banking is a very important activity, they are considering reducing the rate because they are fearing that the results of Brexit will be negative. I will summarize my view of the future by saying the following. We have now witnessed a declaration or evaluation, positive evaluation for CEDR, this conference where we were promised $11 billion. Well, we were promised this $11 billion, but on the basis that we do some improvement in the fiscal system and the governmental way of running things. And what do we have to claim? We hear the president, we hear the Minister of Finance saying we have had two achievements: elections that we had been waiting for, and what is the second, the approval of the budget. Now, all of you know that the elections, which brought about some people winning a seat for 200 votes because of the preferential vote, this is not democratic, neither true, nor does it represent the Lebanese. 50% of the Lebanese did not vote. Why? If they had faith in the government that we have, they would have gone and voted. So this is not an achievement, and let's not kid ourselves. The terrible thing about Lebanon is that politicians speak in a way that is really untrue and intended to give us a notion that we are important, that the whole world is concerned about the health and safety of Lebanon. This is not true. We are not that important to anybody.
May I interrupt?
Let whoever wants to deny this or say something positive. I want just to say the other improvement we are talking about is the budget. What improvement is there? We were promised by this man who is the head of the financial committee in Parliament, who is a lawyer, but he doesn't know any economics, any finance. He said, we are going to reduce the deficit by $250 million, and that the cost of the salaries adjustment is 1,200,000,000 Lebanese pounds. What did we end up with? A cost of 3,400 billion Lebanese pounds for the salaries and the termination of employment pay instead of the 1,200, and we ended by increasing the deficit by $1 billion. Is this an achievement? Who is going to believe it? I have had I'm not bragging, I have had 3 representatives of major parties who pledged to help in the 11.06 billion. The British told me we are not seeing any improvement. All we see is talk which is not at all true. We are going to help Lebanon only with the equipment necessary for better surveillance of the borders. And we should thank them for this, because I don't think we deserve anything. As we are running, we don't deserve anything.
Can I have a question just to return to the lira issue? Now, again, the central bank, this kind of financial engineering that we everybody has seen that in 2016, then again at smaller scale in 2017 and 18. Is it a part of the solution, even if temporary solution, if there is a threat on the lira?
It is the aspirin treatment, the aspirin, what we take for our headache. But the financial engineering that was done in 2016 helped in saving at least 5 major banks, at least. And had we had a failure of these banks, forget about banking in Lebanon and its success. Incidentally, all our banking resources at 160 billion or 170 billion are 1/5 of the resources of a medium-sized bank in Europe or in Switzerland. So we always speak about the banking sector as our tremendous success. What we need is not only that we have more deposits. What we need is the conviction of investors that of investment opportunities in Lebanon are good, that the legal system is good, that the courts can take decisions in a reasonable time and with reasonable dignity and honesty. This is what we need. And this, apparently, we are not being able to convey to anybody with the way we are running our government. The way we are running our government does not give proof. I said of one group that told me, another group who are even more at ease with us said, we are not going to pay a penny if the improvements are the elections and the reduction in the deficit. So in essence, I believe we are in a bad situation. There are three, let's say, three things to do if we are to stand on our feet. The first thing is to stop the deficit of the electricity. I have been writing about this to the point of getting most people really bored with what I have been writing about electricity. Since 2007, I have written over 200 commentaries about electricity, but they don't want to listen. They want that we continue to bring the gas oil with the benefits that accrue to this man or that man. We have delayed for 3 years already the application to have the generation of electricity in Akkar by the wind process.
Can you wrap up?
And we can and we should utilize public lands for developing a farm for solar panels to generate 400 megawatts. Just to give you a very fast example of how we have been forgetting this need. We have 3 plants for generating electricity from the Litani waters. All 3 plants which can produce 190 megawatts, which would be the least expensive production, have been out of order since 2006. And not one minister took the initiative to send people to fix this up, which could have been fixed for $50 million. But we pay $400 million for ships that were supposed to be for free in 3 months. And we ask ourselves, are we improving things? This is I'm finishing. Beyond electricity, 5 years ago, I proposed that we should encourage, legalize hashish, the growing of hashish. Because when the Syrians were in control of the country, they were making billions of dollars, and some Lebanese agents made a lot of money. You go to the Bekaa and see how many tremendously big villas are there by the people who did this. This third thing, we should privatize communications, because communications are bad in terms of reliability, because communications are expensive by any standard, because communications could help some Lebanese to begin working outside the capital and ease the traffic problem, which is the most wasteful of time and resources that face us. Now, what do we have? We have, for example, one Lebanese company, and I'm finishing beyond that, they do a very excellent job of evaluating the solidity of currencies. These are the 5 sons of Michel Eddy, who work in Russia, the US, Ireland, Japan, China, Hong Kong, etc. A really first-class international operation, which was evaluated by JP Morgan 3 years ago at $2 billion. And I talked to the chairman, and he says, Marwan, look, we have 1,800 people working for us. We have 200 in Lebanon. had I had real communications here at reasonable cost, I would have had 1,200 here. But because of the bad communications, I took most of my people to Ireland. So we do have opportunities, but we are not taking the initiative. Thank you. I'm sorry about that.
Thank you, Dr.
Can we ask questions?
No, please, Mr. Sure. Thank you, Dr. Stenda. We know that you are knowledgeable in a lot of areas, and well, this one is limited to the lira issue, but we follow all your articles every week in Nahar and your books and your. So I think all knowledgeable people appreciate what you're doing. Now we surely wish to hear what has to say an expert in debt management, public financial management, and financial modeling, among others. Dr. Munir Rashid is all this at the same time. He has been in top leader position in the IMF, Arab Monetary Fund, and the United Nations, and is the president of the Lebanese Economic Association. Mr. Rashid, your IMF has not been so tender these last months and years concerning Lebanese governance. Is it weird?
Sorry?
Is it weird? It's not been so tender. The IMF in all its reports
They have been
has not been so tender.
they have
with
been
our
very
governments.
they have been very kind to us.
Okay, go on.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the presentations, and Dr. Barakat for his elusive description of what's going on. I'm going actually to make a few remarks to simplify the issue, because too often it becomes a bit complex. And I've been following the development and the stress, the financial stress in the Lebanese economy. I also, by the way, I teach energy economics at the UB, the master's program in energy studies, so I follow that. But I have written on the lira in exactly the Lebanon opportunities about less than a year ago, and I said the lira will not crumble, that will not collapse. That doesn't mean that we don't have problems, but I'm going to explain what's the issue and why there's concern among there's concern among the public regarding the lira. And to respond to your question, Nicholas, often I'm asked not when will the Lebanese pound depreciate, but what's the future of the Lebanese pound? This is the most common question that I'm asked. Okay? But let me elaborate a little bit in a concise manner where we are, how we developed. The economic performance of the Lebanese economy shifted gears in 2011. Until 2011, and probably from 1992, with some upsets in 2005, 2006, we have been, our spending exceeds our earnings. And we still, today, our spending exceeds our earnings, both the private sector and the public sector. Okay? So we spend more than what we get. As if you're spending $150, your income is 100. Now, until 2011, this gap of 50, we have been getting it from outside, okay? Flowing. There are many factors that induced this money to flow in, partly the expatriate Lebanese working abroad, the foreign investors who invest in Lebanon. So the amounts of inflows were exceeding the excess spending, the difference between spending and revenue. We were getting from outside on annual basis, on average, more than what the difference between expenditure and earnings. So there's a gap. Our expenditure exceeded earnings, but we were getting more. The excess amount that we are getting in foreign exchange, we stored it in banks and the central bank, okay? And we used some of it also to invest locally. So we were very comfortable and we accumulated lots of reserves. Then maybe 2011 we had $50 billion in the central bank and a larger, good, comfortable amount in the commercial banks. Now in 2011 and on, primarily because of the political changes that took place, mainly in Syria, the borders were cut and so on, security issues in Lebanon, and also the economies of the Gulf have changed with the decline in the price of fuel and economic activity, an outshoot of the financial crisis. We started getting less money from outside than before. So now we are spending more than our revenue, and the amount we are receiving from outside is less than this gap. So we started using our stock of reserves gradually. So as Mr. Barakat said, from 2011 to the end of 2017, we used 11 billion of our stock of reserves. Okay. And this year alone, we used until September about nearly 5 billion of our reserves in this 1 year, almost half what we used over the period of 10 years. Okay? So the situation is going in this direction. We are spending more than our income, and we are using our stock of reserves. So it's a simple formula. Spending exceeds our income revenue, and we are using stock of reserves. Now, the main factor creating this situation is the government, because the budget deficit this year is very likely to reach 9 trillion Lebanese pounds. Although in the past, this is the second budget we approve, but we approved a budget that's excessively, with an excessively high deficit. I wish we didn't approve it, we would have been better off. So, and there were policies by the central bank, to support the situation. There is financial engineering, and financial engineering is viewed in many different ways. But one of the results of the financial engineering is we created lots of liquidity in the Lebanese pounds. So we accumulated foreign exchange at the central bank, but counter to that, lots of liquidity in the banking system in Lebanese pounds, which started to show now with a higher inflation. Now, and the public has been reacting, when we realize that the deficits are large and we are losing foreign exchange, and we go to the bank and the banks are really trying to seduce you to keep your dollars, we realize that there is a problem, okay? Now, and the response of some of the depositors is to convert currency from the Lebanese pound to the dollars, and some have been transferring money outside. So the loss of nearly 5 billion is part of it, not because of the balance of payments. The balance of payments reflects the excess of spending over income. But we were using reserves not to finance the balance of payments, to finance this gap. We were just using more, transferring money abroad. And this is the situation where we are today. Now, the question is there a risk to the Lebanese pound? What will happen to it? As it's explained here, you may go to this article in the Lebanon Opportunities. We look at the amount of reserves that we have, the central bank, and the amount, meaning foreign exchange, and the amount of foreign exchange that banks have, and how much pressure in the economy, in the system, on us to how much money we are losing with the rest of the world. Goldman Sachs estimated that in the coming 3 or 4 years, on average, we are going to lose about $5 billion a year, similar to the amount that we have recorded now. Now, we look at the central bank has reserves about 34 billion without gold, excluding euro bonds, because they are not really actually foreign reserves. And banks have a liquidity of about 11 billion. So we have about $45 billion aside from the gold in liquid assets. Okay? All these monies in the banking system are not come from depositors, so it's not their money. But what's important is that we have this amount, and it's accessible for us to use. We have also to realize that depositors cannot withdraw their money from the banking system, as Mr. Barakat knows, because many of these are term deposits that they cannot withdraw. So this 45 billion, suppose we need to withdraw from them 5 billion a year, so the 45 are enough to stabilize the exchange rate. So the central bank will have enough to stabilize the exchange rate for quite a number of years, okay? But also the central bank and the banks are not going to deplete all of their reserves. They are going to stop at a certain point. Let's say they want to keep what wouldn't go beyond a minimum of 10 billion. So we have a good number of years to reform before we are forced to depreciate the currency. The currency will depreciate in 2 ways. One, by the decision of the government, because it's the decision. The fixed exchange rate is not a central bank decision, it's a government decision. And the other is by de facto depreciation when the central bank does not have enough foreign exchange to interfere, because the pegged rate is stabilized by interference on daily basis in the foreign exchange market. So we have these enough ammunition to reform. If we don't reform, the situation is not going to improve. It's going to get worse. So the crux of the matter in Lebanon is that the public finance deficit, as Mr. Skander said. So we have to address it, and it's possible to reduce the deficit by $2 billion at least annually for the coming 2 to 3 years. There are lots of room to reduce the deficit. I was recently in Portugal when they had the financial crisis. They reduced wages by 10%. So there is room to take corrective measures. So I think for the time being, we shouldn't worry very much about the exchange rate, and I think you can sleep well, and thank you.
Thank you so much. Our three guest speakers have talking about oil and gas perspectives, financial perspective. Well, there is a session here for oil and gas, including the financial perspective, but unfortunately at the same time now in room D, so we cannot be here and there at the same time. But again, you can see all the interventions on YouTube and on our website, so you can see there is a banker there who would probably, from FFA, who would probably give some insight, financial insight about oil and gas. Now, I think...
Can I comment on something that Dr. Skander has said? Because I agree with most of the things that he has said.
Yeah.
But there is a couple of things that...
We are going into controversy now?
No.
No?
No, it's a 3 years.
No, but
I'll not reverse.
No, it's okay, of course, but...
I will be very brief.
Yeah, of course.
First, regarding the Goldman Sachs report, that's true that the threshold that Goldman Sachs has said about deposit growth is 3.5%. I happened to brainstorm with Farouk Sousa, who is the writer of this report, for the past couple of weeks, 3 times before he wrote his report. And I know what he's talking about. He's talking about nominal growth in deposits, not growth in deposits net of interest. One. Concerning the rise in the interest rates that we have witnessed recently, I'm resorting to the central bank figures, which have been issued for end October. The average interest rate is 7.74%. That's true that we have some interest rates as high as 10% and 15% on the Lebanese pound for a longer period, but the average interest rate when we aggregate demand deposits, 1 month deposits, 3 months deposits, 1 year deposits, and 5 year deposits, the average interest rate is 7.74%. It has increased by 2.5% over the past 2 years, 2.5%. The federal fund rate, which used to be at 25 bips back 2 years ago, is now at 250 bips, or the LIBOR. The LIBOR has increased from 25 bips to 2.50 bips, to 2.50%. So it is in line, it is still in line with the increase in international interest rates that we have witnessed in the US and that we have witnessed more importantly in emerging markets. I definitely agree with Dr. Iskander about his outlook on the electricity sector. Definitely, this is a cheval de bataille, as you say in French, for any future reform in Lebanon. We have a price of electricity today in Lebanon of 9 cents per kilowatt hour when compared to 19 cents of kilowatt hour at the global scale. If we reform the sector and we ensure 24-hour electricity, there is room to increase tariffs by 40%, at least by 40%. This is the recommendation of the IMF, and still be in the low tariffication category worldwide, while the Lebanese will not be paying any more dual bills, one for the EDL and another for the local generator.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Barakat. Now, I will not ask questions. I will give priority to the audience. Anyone?
May I say just two words that could be beneficial? I'm not debating what Marwan said, and he raised only one objection. The other we agree.
Yes, very good. Very good.
I believe that in Lebanon, most economists use faulty statistics. The GDP has been, as we saw, evaluated at $55 billion. 2 years ago, I was in a meeting of the World Bank, and they said, we estimate the black economy, the non-official economy, to be 30%. And I told them, how come then you say our GDP is 55? And they said, you are right. It is more, but we cannot say it because we only use official figures. I'm definitely positive in evaluating that our GDP is over 70 billion, and I'll tell you why. In 2017, the number of checks that are cleared one against the other, the value of the checks cleared was 72 billion. The $72 billion. The checks that are paid for an investment or for consumption or for whatever. The use of the cards was 22 billion. That makes the total movement of expenditure for different purposes 94 billion. And I'm very sure that quite a bit of expenditure has been paid in cash and has not been accounted for. So who can tell me that a turnover of that order, although we have borrowed 6 billion, let's deduct it from the total, is 55 billion. It is completely wrong. And to that point is very important because we are projecting the debt in relation to the national income. Okay. If the national income is 72 or 75, then our debt is not that dangerous. Secondly, there's something very important about the public debt. We speak of the highest public debt in Japan, no?
Yes.
Japan has 250% the rate of the debt to the GDP. Whoever is very anxious about the Japanese yen, nobody. Why? Because Japan is an active economy. It is an organized economy in spite of what they are doing to Carlos Ghosn. But definitely we cannot but say that it is one of the foremost economies in the world. It's the third largest, and yet nobody speaks about the yen and its danger. And the worst aspect in Lebanon has been to say we are like Greece. We are going to go bankrupt, and bankrupt, as I said, is not the word, in no time. Now Greece owes the Central Bank of Europe and the IMF 330 billion euros. And they need another 50 billion euros now to face 2019. That means they are well over $400 billion of debt, which is 4.5 times as much as we are. We have 6 million people on this territory, 4 million Lebanese, 2 million other than us. And the Greeks are about 11 million. We are 60% of what they are. They should, if we are like Greece, we should be owing 240 billion. Luckily, nishkur Allah, we are not owing that. Hence, it's important to clarify the position of Lebanon. Some points are promising, many points are depressing. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. We surely need more statistics and better statistics in Lebanon. That's what we all are asking for. Now, for the questions, please, no controversies, no interventions. Please, questions only, because we don't want to go into controversy. Yes, but yeah, well, if you have a question, you are most welcome, sir.
My opinions to myself. Question regarding the trade deficit. You all talked about the budget deficit, which is going to cost us about $5 billion moving forward. What is the effect of the trade deficit on the reserve that we have?
Okay, thank you. So it's about 15 billion a year or 14 billion a year of trade deficit.
About 15, 14, 15.
Yeah. So that's good. That the deficit of the goods trade, we have the services that we can add or not. So, Mr. Ibrahim.
Yes, the trade deficit, yes, as you have mentioned, it's around $15-16 billion. We have $20 billion of imports. We have $3 billion of exports. So we have a trade deficit of close to $17 billion per annum. The importance about the trade deficit in Lebanon is that it is covered by financial inflows coming from the diaspora of Lebanese abroad. The 12 million Lebanese abroad that covers services and services.
Yes.
That repatriate on a regular basis remittances to Lebanon, covering the trade deficit along with services. And the important thing is to look at is the balance of payments, which is the result of all the transactions between Lebanon and abroad, capital transactions and commercial transactions. Here, what is important to mention is that the average of all deficits in the balance of payments over the past 25 years has been 5% of GDP. The average of all surpluses in the balance of payments over the past 25 years has been 9% of GDP. 5%, 9%, those are not high figures by comparative standards. We don't have large deficits or large surpluses in the balance of payments because of the fact that the financial inflows coming from the diaspora of Lebanese abroad always cover the trade deficit, keeping acceptable surpluses also or deficits in the bottom line, which is the DOP.
Thank you so much.
I thought that was only about 7 billion.
Hello.
Please, no. Sir.
Traders also are transferring, are buying stuff and paying abroad and then moving it here?
No, it's not that. That's not what he said. Anyway, no.
No, the 7 or the $8 billion to be the $8 billion is the remittances. But you have other inflows such as FDI, such as portfolio inflows,
Services,
such as other inflows.
a trade of
If
services.
you aggregate all those inflows, you will reach the figure that would cover
Okay.
the
Thank
deficit.
you. Sir?
Sir, I have a question, very easy. We know that the economy is private sector, public sector. The private sector, let us take it apart. And the public, private sector will put it apart. The public sector is everything which we have, we already have done this huge amount of money. We give them a huge amount of money. They are not working anything. They are not making money. We need a lot of sectorization. Suddenly electricity is not making money. The communication is not making money, or at least we don't know how much is making, and we can make much more. So in that area, we are spending a lot of money and taking it from the sector. We are printing money. We are printing lira. And year after year, if the lira will not collapse now, when it will collapse? Because we have huge spending, we didn't do any restructurations. What shall we do? And from where we are going to get the dollars? And
Yeah.
sorry, and the question is, can we use this 41 upon Basel specification? We cannot use this $41 billion. This is our reserve from the banks and the central bank. We are
Yeah.
talking about reserve that maybe we cannot use.
I think most of the answers has been already addressed by Mr. Barakat and Mr. Iskandar, but if you want to add something about this, Mr. Munir, Tadar.
You know, the reserve, the central bank gets its reserves from the banks. The banks get their money, let's say at least foreign exchange, from their clients. So they don't own this money. So this is money deposited in the banks, and the banks deposit in the central bank. The central bank can use it, you know, to intervene to stabilize the exchange rate. This is the principle of packing to the dollar. So the constraints on the central bank is to maintain its position to be able to intervene. It's not because the money, it's not his. It's like a bank. You put your money in a bank, but the bank lends your money. So this is they are intermediation instruments in the economy.
So of course that's why we call it gross reserves. It's not net reserves of the central bank. But he has been using this money, and this is yes, to stabilize the lira. Yes.
I want to say something about the balance, the balance of payments. I contend also that its figures are not accurate. I'll tell you an example. In 2012, we recorded a cost of imports of products, oil products, of 8.8 billion. 2011, we indicated that it was 4.4 billion. The price of oil had not doubled. Why? It was going to Syria. Of course. And I said this to the head of the World Bank at the time, and he said, we use official figures. I told them, go to two major companies here. He went to them, they told him, yes, we sold for 4.8 billion, and it was all in cash. So it did not enter the official figures, and this has happened 2 years.
Yes. We remember also the trade figures which are supplied generally by the Ministry of Economy, saying at 1 or 2 years there has been exports of oil from Lebanon. It has been accounted for in the trade of the Ministry of Economy. So of course we ask the Ministry of Economy, we don't have oil, how can we export oil? And that, of course, these are quantities of oil which are imported into Lebanon and then re-exported to Syria. Some of them are not smuggled, so they are accounted for at the Masna exchange. So, another question? Yes, please, sir.
Yes, hello. I just have a question concerning the bonds in Lebanon, specifically the yield curve on them. I might be mistaken here, but isn't the yield curve currently on the bonds in Lebanon going inverted? And if so, what would that have an effect on the currency?
Who wants to answer this question? Mr. Barakat,
It is inverted. You mean the longer end has a lower yield than the shorter end?
Yes, exactly.
No, it's not inverted.
It's not.
No.
Okay. But if so, how would that affect the currency? If that were to happen?
You know, the important thing about the important thing regarding the bonds and the treasury bills that has been taken, the decision that has been taken yesterday, I don't know if you are aware about it, is the fact that the Ministry of Finance has accepted to issue debt from now on at market rates, not at fictitious rates. We
Which
used to
means
issue-
10%.
which means 10.5%,
Yes.
3 points.
which is three percentage higher than the actual
So
rate.
oh yeah, it's 10%.
This is this reflects this. I know because we talk with bond investors. This reflected a positive signal to the overall Eurobond investment community as to the fact that the Minister of Finance is giving the bondholders what is in line with the overall risk premium in Lebanon.
But this
Before
is
that, we used to have the public institutions and the central bank and the National Security Fund subscribing only in those DBs issues on behalf of the Ministry of Finance. With the change from those rates to market rates, I think that the Ministry of Finance can tap the market and ensure the financing needs looking forward.
but this means that the burden of the public debt will be higher.
Yes, it would have.
Thank you. Yes, please. The microphone.
Yes. What about the risk of the expatriate? Because until now, the expatriate are still sending money to Lebanon. As you said, they are covering a part of the deficit. But what if expatriates panic? And do we have any figures to know exactly what is the amount of money of the expatriate, let's say the one in Europe or in the Gulf, the Lebanese expatriate their money in the banks of Lebanon?
Yes, we do have. The figures which are generally supplied by the central bank is about 7 billion a year, which are a year.
If it's 7 billion, how they cover the deficit in trade? And I don't think here also the figures are not correct.
Could you allow me for a second? You know, the non-resident deposits
Those are Lebanese, huh?
but the definition is non-resident. The resident, the foreigner or a Lebanese is the same. They are 52 trillion Lebanese pounds by non-residents. These are mostly Lebanese expatriates. Okay. Now, if they withdraw their money all of a sudden, you will have crisis. If the all depositors go to the banks and they say, we want to withdraw our money. In any country, you will have crisis. The States, or France, or so. But this will not happen because there are no indicators for a crisis because they are receiving interest. Actually, we still receiving a positive inflow. The way they were last year, 51 trillion. Today, they are almost 53 trillion, induced by the interest rate. It's the way you manage the economy. So it's very unlikely, you know, I lived in the States for most of my life. They give you less than 1%, you know, and I have accounts in the States. If you want to get 2%, you cannot withdraw it for 5 years. If you withdraw it before 5 years, you have to pay penalty of 2 years of interest on the amount. 2 years of interest. All you gained, you are. So Lebanon is attractive for the risk. Investors balance their risk. You know, they put their money, a good part in Lebanon, another part in Cyprus, a third part in France, and so on. So this is how you manage it. Lebanon is part of this risk basket for investors, including expatriates.
Okay, thank you. I want to add one small thing, which is this year, the growth in non-resident deposits, the deposits of the Lebanese abroad, has been by $2.2 billion over the first 10 months of this year, when compared to $5 billion growth in the overall deposit base. So 50% of the deposit base has been accounted for by non-residents. When compared to an overall ratio of non-resident deposits, the stock of non-resident deposits, as a percentage of total deposits, it is around 21, 22%. So this means that we got this year a more important share from abroad than our traditional share. This means that the non-resident
Just to
depositors
be-
are not in a panicking
Okay.
mode. Here.
Just to be precise, Dr. Barakat or Dr. Skandar, we have the expatriate, that means the Lebanese, and the non-residents. Now, it could be Saudi guys who are putting their money here too.
It's the same,
So-
non-resident.
Yeah,
doesn't do
yes, I know.
nationality.
So expatriates, as long as they don't register their address here, so they are non-resident. But if they have an address here, registered to the bank, or living between here and Saudi Arabia, so it could be that or that, but this
that's
is
why it's not
a
clear,
legal
yeah.
issue, yes, that's it.
I want just to call your attention to one point. In 2008, when the international financial crisis came about and some of the major banks, international banks, seemed to be in very bad trouble, like Credit Suisse, like Citibank, etc., Lebanese, whether resident or non-resident, transferred to Lebanon $24 billion. That was the reason why we have been able to hold vis-à-vis balance of payments deficits. The last thing I want to say, it is very personal. Those of you who read Arabic, who might want to read my latest book on central banks in uncertain times, you can find it outside. It's a present, not for sale.
Thank you. مصارف المركزية. Yes. Another question, please. Thank you, sir.
We are a country that leans on imports. We import everything.
Yes.
We import food, we import technology, we import everything. We have the merchants that import in USD currency, and they are collecting these sales in LBP.
Okay.
Okay, this is one factor. The second one, these days, depositors are transferring on maturity their deposits in LBP also. So these factors does affect our pound or no?
Okay, so of course we have the the collage. No, I don't think so, unless you have another opinion. That's not, because as long as the exchange rate is fixed now, they don't have a problem. Even though they are selling sometimes in dollars, you want to buy a car, you buy it in dollars, or a lot of things are sold in dollars. So about, I don't know, 70% of the transactions are in dollars anyway.
You see, the fact that we have a large trade deficit or current account deficit, it is existing because we have financing. If we didn't have financing, it will not exist. So what created a large trade deficit over the years, because we received substantial amount of money from our expatriates, or capital flows are on net basis about $9 billion, on net basis. The transactions in the balance of payments, which balance of payments, credit and debit, they are about $45 billion. So that when we have a deficit of $3 billion, we have credit, let's say 42, and debit of 45. So we have large amounts. So now, when they do conversion, there is a reaction in the market and in the central bank that interest rates will adjust to attract you to keep your money in dollars, or to take money more, to convert money into Lebanese pounds. Some of the policies were inducing, if you go to a bank, they tell you on a Lebanese pound, I'm going to give you 11% if you convert from the dollar to Lebanese pound. And there's a mix of clients with different appraisal of the risk. Many do, some don't. This is how the market works. Not all clients perceive risk the same. You perceive the lira as risky. I was talking to someone today, they said they don't perceive the lira is risky with this high rate of return on it. This is how the market operates.
Okay.
Once all the clients think the same way, the market will collapse. Any market will.
Thank you. Another question? No, please, let's take another intervention. Yes, after the... Yes, please. Go on, there. Sir? Yes.
On one side, the central bank has asked the banks to decrease the debt in Lebanon, in Lebanese pound, in domestic currency. On the other side, the banks has increased interest rates on domestic currency. Will this lead to more recession in the country?
Sure, there is a mismatching between the deposit rate and the credit rate.
It's not
That's
a
it?
mismatch.
Yes.
You know,
No?
with what this leads to.
To more recession
Yeah,
in the
when
country because
yeah. When we have a large fiscal deficit, Lebanon or any other countries, interest rates go up. When interest rates go up, it's not conducive for investment. We have the problem with the real estate market because real estate is investment. People cannot afford it because of the high rates. We are trying to subsidize the rates. The rates subsidy is not a permanent solution. So the outcome of mismanagement of the economy is reflected in a high interest rate. And it's damaging to the economy. There are a small portion, a portion of the Lebanese are earning more money, but another portion is costing them more money. You know, there are people who with lower income, they borrow to send their kids to school and so on, they borrow to buy property and so on. So this is the reason, the incentive to reduce the deficit is precisely so that the interest rate goes down. The high interest rate is very damaging, and it makes actually the fiscal deficit even worse because we have to pay higher interest on the debt.
Our guest, yes. I think there is another part. Sorry, I think there is another part of his question concerning, you know, that the credits, the loans, has been falling this year about 2%. I don't know if Saudi, but all the central banks so far. So is it, yes, 2%. So this is because there is no demand, or because the banks are more stricter, or they have more requirements, or what they say, we don't want to invest.
The banks are getting from the central bank more attractive rates than they can get from the private sector.
Okay.
Without taking the private sector
Risk.
risk.
Okay.
This is the bottom line.
Okay.
Now, the reason behind it on behalf of the central bank is simply because that's true that economic growth is important, but the priority is to maintain financial stability.
Okay.
Between the priorities of maintaining financial stability and the priority of boosting economic growth, the priority goes for the time being to maintain financial stability. This is why it is offering high rates that allowed banks to offer in return higher rates to their depositors. And this is where your other part of your question falls about decreasing the loans to depositors.
The investment and recession. Yeah, the recession.
It also falls, the decline, actually, the target is 25% by end 2019. The current rate is today, the current loans to deposits in LL is 34%. So we will be decreasing our loans to deposits in LL. The target on behalf of the central bank is simply because they want to forbid speculation against the national currency, especially within the overall uncertainties that the country is passing through.
Okay.
And reducing loans to deposits in LL means that banks have to reduce their loans in LL, which is important because if they are extending loans in LL within the context of a dollarized economy, they will be converted into foreign currencies, putting pressure on the foreign currency reserve of the central bank. At the same time, they have to increase their deposits in LL because to improve the ratio, they have to increase their deposits in LL. So this will mean that they will be offering attractive offers to their customers, and they will be putting more efforts to encourage their customers to hold Lebanese pounds in order to reinforce their LL deposit and to decrease the ratio. So both numerator and denominator effects fall within the context of maintaining
Okay.
stability.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Barakat. Now, some of our guests are have to go. Unfortunately, do you have a last question? One last question? It's okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We wrap up. Thanks our guests, speakers.